千里之行，始于足下. A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. From the Warring States period, 2,500 years ago, roughly at the time of Lao Zi, at the time when the Daodejing was written, a time of warfare and strife and chaos. So the name of the story is Purchasing Yi. Yi is this character that you see here. So the two characters that you see in the title, the one on the left is purchase, to buy. And then Yi, the one on the right, is the concept of righteousness. I feel it is important to tell this story because the concept of righteousness as presented in the Tao is a little bit different in flavor from the English word righteousness. Yi, the Chinese concept, is about right and wrong, as I'm going to illustrate in just a moment. This story is about a man by the name of Feng Xuan. You'll see his name, a two-character name on the right of the slide. And he lived in the Warring States period in Qi Guo, the Qi kingdom. He was poor, came from a poor background, had no real way to make a living, no real good prospects. So what he did is people with talents in his time often did was that he looked around for a patron. He looked around for a powerful lord who could retain his services. And there was one in his vicinity. And that's the name that you see on the left in the slide, Meng Changjuan. Meng Changjuan was a powerful lord who was generous. He was a duke with his own territory. Meng Changjuan had many retainers, thousands of people that he retained. These were guests of the duke with no clearly defined duties to perform. It's just that he kept them around out of generosity so that if he needed to do something, he had people to do it for him. And his plans, his strategies, he would consult with the retainers among them. So at that time, the name, when people talked about Meng Changjuan, they used that as an illustration of generosity because he literally had thousands of retainers. So this young man, Feng Xuan, being poor, having no prospects, decided to go to the duke to see if he can find employment for himself. He had a friend who was already one of the guests at the mansion. So his friend recommended him to the duke, and the duke said, well, what's he good at? And his friend was very honest and said, well, he's not really good at anything. So the duke asked, so any skills, any expertise in anything? And his friend said, well, no, he's got nothing. So the duke, being very generous, still decided to give him a place to stay, give him meals, was actually quite generous. Later on, he was, he requested and received better food, a chariot that he was authorized to use, and he even got some money for his elderly mother. So he was very grateful to the duke. And his chance to repay the duke's kindness occurred one day when the duke made the announcement for everyone saying that, well, he had this remote region in his territory where people were in debt to him from years ago. It is so remote that he hadn't had the chance to send someone there to collect the debts from the people. So he wanted to get a volunteer to go out there to that remote region to collect the debts. So at this time, Feng Xuan decided to step forward to volunteer himself. So the Duke said to him, "Well, I've been so busy, I haven't had the chance to do this myself. Would you mind traveling there as my representative, collect those loan payments on my behalf?" So he agreed and accepted the task. He began to prepare for the trip. He took all the loan documents. He took guards with him. And when he was done with his preparations, he reported back to the Duke. Basically, Your Grace, I'm ready. And after I collect the money on your behalf, what would you like me to do with the money? Would you like me to purchase anything to bring back to you? And the Duke said, yeah, go ahead and purchase something. So as to what, the Duke could not think of anything. So he said, take a look around. If you see that there's something that I need but don't have, I want you to get that for me. So Feng Xuan said, yes, my lord. So after a long trip with the guards, he arrived at the remote region. So he had the guards round up all the villagers to go over the loan documents that he had brought with him one by one. Now, the villagers were quite poor. Remember, this was during the warring stage period, a time of strike or warfare. So the villagers literally had nothing, or they had very little. Now, they knew that the payments were long overdue, so they really didn't have a choice. Now, Feng Xuan could tell that it was very difficult for them. He looked at them and he saw how anxious they were. They were so worried about repaying because most of them had very little, some had nothing. So he collected what he could. He checked against the ledger. And then he announced to all of them, all the villagers gathering around, he said, by order of the Duke, I am authorized to return the loan payments back to you, effective immediately. So he handed the money back to the people who had paid. And they were stunned. They could not believe that he was doing this. They had never seen anything like this before. Then they were even more surprised because Feng Xuan took out all the loan documents, everything, and then he set them on fire. As the documents were burning, the villagers realized that this was way beyond the Duke granting them some kind of extension, like you don't have to pay now, pay next year. No, this was completely writing off the loans. It meant, the burning documents meant that the Duke would be forgiving all of these loans completely. Everything's cleared. So they cheered. As the fire burned, they kept chanting, "Long live the Duke! Long live the Duke!" So sometime after that, Feng Xuan returned to the palace and reported back to the Duke. The Duke was surprised and said, hey, you're back early. Were you able to collect on all the loans? And Feng Xuan said, Your Grace, I was able to collect some of the money. So the Duke said, good. So what did you purchase from me? So Feng Xuan said, your instructions to me was to look around, to note what you were lacking, and buy what I thought you needed. And that's exactly what I did. I looked around. I saw your palace was full of treasures, you didn't really need any more treasures. You had plenty. Your stables full of strong horses, your harem full of beautiful concubines. You don't need any more of those either. So as I looked around, Your Grace, the only thing that I saw that you really needed was E, righteousness. So I went ahead and purchased that for you. What? So the Duke was completely puzzled by this. He's like, well, what do you mean? I mean, he knew what E meant. E meant righteousness, the right thing, doing what's right, but it's such an intangible concept, right? So he had no clue, no idea how it could be bought like some kind of commodity. This was puzzling. So Fengshen explained, Your Grace, you're the lord of this remote region. So rather than to treat these people as a father would his children, you wanted to extract money from them. I saw that they struggled with poverty. So in your name, Your Grace, I falsely claimed that I acted under your orders to return the money to them. And I also burned up the loan documents. In response, they cheered and chanted, "Long live the Duke." So that's how I purchased E, righteousness, for you. Now, the Duke was not a happy camper when he heard this, because he was expecting that there would be something material that was bought with the money. So now it was all said and done, and he had nothing. So he was annoyed. So he waved his retainer function off, and he said, "Okay, fine, that's all right. Okay, well, let's not talk about this anymore. Let's speak no more of this matter." Now, he would have forgotten about this, except that a year later, the Duke, encountered a great misfortune. So this is Qi Guo. This is the kingdom of Qi. There was always power struggle present in the royal court. So at this particular time, the palace intrigue at the royal court went badly against the Duke, and it meant that he had lost the support of the king of Qi Guo. So the king indicated that he would no longer support the Duke. He would take back the land that was granted to this noble, and it meant that the Duke's enemies were now free to attack him. Suddenly, the Duke realized that he was in danger. More than that, his entire family was in danger. They could easily be slaughtered, and it could happen very quickly. So the situation was grave. It was at this time that Fengshen stepped forward once again to volunteer. Now, the Duke had no idea how to save his family and his own skin, so he was only too happy to let Fengshen take charge of the situation. And what Fengshen did was that he organized a group of trusted guards. He made the appropriate arrangements, and in secrecy, he escorted the Duke and his family out of the palace, and they traveled together toward a remote region, the same region where he went to collect the debts. Fengshen sent a scout ahead to notify the villagers, let them know that they were coming. So to the Duke, it was a surprising sight when they got near this remote region. The villagers had all come out. They lined the road. They greeted him. They welcomed him. Men, women, the elderly, young children, hundreds of them. They lined the path and they cheered his arrival. So as the Duke moved through the welcoming crowds, he realized that he was safe. finally, because the villagers had already set up a secure place for him and his family, they would protect him by not revealing his whereabouts to anyone, especially the spies of his enemies. So after days of facing what he thought would be certain death for himself and his family, he could now finally breathe a sigh of relief. At that moment, he turned to Fengshen. He said, "Sir, this Yi, this righteousness that you said you bought for me, today I finally understand. I finally see this Yi with my own eyes." So that's the story about purchasing Yi. Now, I want to make it very clear that despite the title of the story, this is not about buying something with money, especially something that is intangible. The real crucial heart of the story is that in order to work with the balancing mechanism of the Tao, the karma, to do positive karma, if you will, the way to do it is to do what is right. Do what is right at the right time for the right reasons, and trust in the Tao that the balancing mechanism will in turn take care of you. That's the heart of the story. And our main character, Fengshen, he had no special talents, no special skills. But I'm here to say that to practice the virtue of Yi, it requires no special talents, no special skills. It is something that you can do based on what your intuitive wisdom tells you to do. So it is now time to explain this concept of Yi, which is similar and yet not quite like the English word righteousness. To do that, I'm going to draw another connection to great works from Chinese history. So everyone who heard my previous presentation remembers probably the 4 books in the 5 classics. So for the Chinese, this is 四书五经. Previously, we talked about the book right in the middle, 大学, which means great learning. This time, we're going to bring forth another book, Mengzi, which is the book right next to the great learning. These books are not in any particular order. It just happens to be that Mengzi is right next to great learning in this particular photo. It doesn't have to be. There's no particular sequence to it. So Mengzi, you see the 2 characters on top of the slide as the title. Mencius is the name of Mengzi. So why the different kind of translation? Well, it's because Kongzi was translated as Confucius. Confucius and Mencius, these are Latin names of these ancient sages. These names came about because when the European missionaries arrived in ancient China, the first things they learned about the traditions of ancient China were the teachings of Confucius and Mencius. Now, what the Chinese called them, Kongzi, Mengzi, were the basis of the translation for their names because these were ancient European missionaries. They based the translation on Latin, and that's how we got the name Confucius and Mencius. So Mengzi, Mencius, actually had quite a few things to say about benevolence and righteousness. So to Mengzi, these were some of the most important characteristics that a good person can cultivate. Mengzi always believed that people were basically good, but he also believed that it was necessary for people to cultivate, to put in the hard work, to bring about that goodness from within. So he wrote these lines in Mengzi. 人，人心也，亦人路也。Let me translate that for you. So the 人 that you see here, that's the character for benevolence. 人, the homophone here, that's the character for person. 心, that is the character for heart. 也, this is a sentence ending or sentence pausing character. So together, if you were to do a very straightforward verbatim depiction, it would be 人 benevolence, human heart, period. By itself, that's not going to mean a whole lot, and I'll give you the real translation in just a moment. But for now, let me explain the second line. E, well, there you go. That's the E character. That's the concept that we were just talking about in the story. I want to use Mencius to explain what E actually means to the ancient Chinese. So E, righteousness, 人, that's human, that's person again. 路, that's a path or a road. 也, sentence ending character. So it's saying righteousness, comma, human road. What? What does that mean? So here's the translation. Benevolence, the heart of humans. Righteousness, the path of humans. So that's a little bit better than before, but what does that mean? And you can now get a flavor for how brief and concise the ancient sages were. They often express themselves in this manner. Not a whole lot of wasted words at all, just the bare minimum to convey whatever is enough to convey the meaning. So generations of students after that would have to read these lines and understand by looking through the words and discover the meaning behind them. So here's the meaning. Benevolence is the compassion that exists naturally in the heart. So all human beings are equipped with this compassion, our ability, our inclination to take care of one another. When we see someone suffering, when we see someone in pain, it is very natural for us to sympathize with that, to reach out, to see if there's some way that we can help. Completely natural. And the exercise, the optimization of that inner compassion, the expression of that, the flow of that compassion, that would be high benevolence. Make sense? Now, let's take a look at the meaning for the second line. Righteousness, the path of humans. What does that mean? Righteousness is the path of human beings that human beings intuitively know they should walk. So there's a particular path that we all intuitively know is the right way. That's the right way to go. It's the right thing to do for the right reasons. We have this intuitive grasp of what is right, the right and wrong. It needs to be brought out. It needs to be amplified through personal cultivation, but it's there. It exists in everyone, which is how most people, after learning about the world, after being taught, by parents and teachers, can bring that out, can bring out what is already within to know the difference between right and wrong. And if you ask anyone about, their parents, their teachers, how they grew up, one of the first things everyone will say is how grateful they are to have a good parent or good teacher, who taught me right from wrong. That's what this is talking about. So that, I hope, will give everyone a real good understanding and a good personal connection to the concept of righteousness. Now, it can be very difficult sometimes to distinguish between what your intuitive wisdom is telling you to what your ego self is saying. Sometimes they're all mixed up together and it's confusing and it can be hard to separate out the two. The only advice that I have for everyone is to practice, practice, practice. The more you practice, the better you get at distinguishing between the whispers of wisdom to the voice of the ego. So there's no magical formula, there's guidance, there's suggestions, there's little nudges along the way that can be helpful. Ultimately, unfortunately, all of us, every single one of us, we're on our own. We have to experience it ourselves. And then, perhaps with the help of friends, getting their input. At the end of the day, though, the final decision is still up to you to figure out. I find it very useful to ask myself this question. Am I being totally honest with myself? Am I being brutally frank with myself? When I want to do something, is it for altruistic, selfless reasons, or is there something that I'm after? Am I trying to look good to my peers? Am I trying to gain a personal advantage? I want to be brutally frank and open and honest and direct with myself. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Let us travel safely. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.